Elite Facts presents
10 movie sequels that killed their franchise.
10.
Batman and Robin. Throughout the late 1980s and 90s, the Batman franchise just wouldn't stop and rolled through 3 leading men over the space of 4 movies. But that all came to a sudden halt back in 1997 when the release of Batman and Robin was fronted by George Clooney. Director Joel Schumacher decided to go for a more campy tone to the movie, which seemed to start in Batman Forever as an attempt to honor the 1960s TV series. But the camp was taken to a new level in Batman and Robin. Sadly, this somehow felt like a bit of a setback since the earlier installments of the franchise were a bit more on the serious side. Even so, the studio had apparently started work on a sequel before Batman and Robin had even arrived in theaters, but since it received some pretty poor reviews, to put it mildly, as well as disappointing box office grosses, those plans were brought to an abrupt end. It would then take nearly a decade before director Christopher Nolan would rescue the series and take the reins and bring us the rebooted Caped Crusader in 2005's critically acclaimed box office smash, Batman Begins.
9.
Mortal Kombat Annihilation. So it's no surprise that not everyone is a fan of the Mortal Kombat movies, but it's safe to say that the first installment was somewhat of a surprise hit, and since it was based on such a popular video game series, a sequel was pretty much inevitable. Unfortunately, that sequel came in the form of Mortal Kombat Annihilation, which is considered by some to be one of the worst films ever made, as well as one of the worst sequels ever produced. The movie itself seemed extremely rushed and brought in way too many characters than was necessary. Of course, these characters were generally brought in just to bring their video game versions to life and have the odd fight scene here and there. Not only that, but a mere 3 members of the original cast remained, one of whom was killed off instantly, as we see all the other previous characters recast. The movie as a whole seemed pretty low budget and was quite disappointing, seeing as the first wasn't actually that bad. But it seems that all of these factors combined have given the series a fatality it cannot come back from.
8.
RoboCop 3. RoboCop is without a doubt a 1980s triumph of modern science fiction. Detroit police officer Alex Murphy is killed in a vicious attack, only to be brought back as an ass-kicking cyborg who dispenses justice on those who wronged him. What may seem like a movie full of righteous machoism, RoboCop also has layers of storytelling and world-building, as well as the fascism and consumerism of the 1980s. RoboCop 2 wasn't so bad either, though it doesn't come close to the original. Now, RoboCop 3, however, was simply a mess. The violence had been toned down in order to reach a more family-friendly audience, and much like Mortal Kombat, the lead role had been switched right in front of our very eyes. The special effects took a major hit as well since the budget had been slashed. We also see RoboCop fight ninjas because, well, we don't know why. Since this disaster, the RoboCop franchise has not been able to find solid footing, even after the 2014 remake, which, while not so bad and much better than RoboCop 3, still doesn't compare to the original.
7.
Grease 2. Probably a sequel that is easily forgotten, Grease 2 is the unfortunate follow-up to one of the greatest movie musicals of all time. After the original Grease's obvious success, it was only a matter of time until plans for a sequel were put in place. In fact, they did plan on making a sort of Grease cinematic universe, which would have included around 4 sequels and a possible television series. They would all be set at Rydell High in the 1950s and eventually roll into the psychedelic 60s. Of course, the first step in this Grease universe was to create Grease 2. Let's just say it didn't work out at all how they had intended, and Grease 2 was seen as a lazy attempt to reform the magic and fun of the first movie. They basically rehashed the same plotline as the original, just flip-flopping the genders of the 2 lead characters. And they had some pretty bizarre song choices, one of which will no doubt go down in history as one of the worst songs ever written, titled Reproduction. Although there is no Grease 3, there was a Grease Live that had a solid run on the Fox network, proving that audiences still enjoy the nostalgia from the first movie.
6.
Jaws: The Revenge. Let's just take a minute and ask 2 simple questions. 1, how do you even make a sequel, let alone 3 of them, about a killer shark who died in the first film, and the second film, and the third film? And 2, why would you even want to? Well, this being Hollywood, the answer of course is money. When Jaws 2 came out, it wasn't so bad, even though it was near enough a rehash of the original, but at least it had Sheriff Brody. After this first sequel, however, the studio seemed to get desperate for ideas and cashed in on a cheap gimmick for 1983's Jaws 3D. But when you compare that to the fourth installment, Jaws the Revenge, it made number 3 look like a goddamn cinematic masterpiece. The story in number 4 was ridiculous. It revolved around the idea of a shark deliberately trying to exact revenge on the family from the first movie. It even went as far as to blame the shark's murder spree on a vengeful witch doctor. How was this script even given the green light by a studio? Needless to say, Jaws the Revenge was a critical and financial disaster, and even now, in the era of remakes and reboots, it seems to be one franchise that has remained blissfully underwater.
5,
Blade Trinity. Sometimes it's easy to forget that Blade is a Marvel Comics character, and because that's the case, there are years of stories that could have made it to the big screen. The well-known Daywalker was played by Wesley Snipes, and the first movie had plenty of violence and kung fu vampire action, which seemed to be all the ingredients to keep the sequels coming. That was until the third film, Blade Trinity, hit theaters in 2004. This installment was received with disappointing reviews and low box office grosses, which caused collapse after and during the movie. It's said that Snipes, who was also a producer on the movie, would engage in all kinds of eccentric behavior while on set, once going so far as to strangle the director. And he was so unhappy after the release of the movie that he ended up suing the studio. The Marvel Cinematic Universe has since made superhero movies into really big business, but unfortunately for now, it seems Blade is still hidden in the shadows.
4,
The Next Karate Kid. Back in the 1980s, the Karate Kid series was a pretty big deal, and when the 90s hit, the idea just simply did not work. The Next Karate Kid was released in 1994, but it was made without the appearance of the original Karate Kid, Ralph Macchio, due to him being well and truly an adult by then. So they replaced him with Hilary Swank. Thankfully, Pat Morita returned as the legendary karate master, Mr. Miyagi, but it just wasn't enough to save the franchise. The plot was mostly a rehash of the previous 3 installments, in which Mr. Miyagi teaches his wisdom and karate skills to a teenager, which, after 3 previous movies of similar plots, made for a bit of a yawn fest. There was a subplot regarding the school security fraternity, but that was just plain silly, so we won't even get into that. Since this box office flop, Karate Kid was not heard from for 16 years, until it got rebooted with Jaden Smith and Jackie Chan back in 2010.
3,
Speed 2 Cruise Control. The classic 1994 hit Speed was essentially Die Hard on a bus, but was a brilliant movie where we saw Keanu Reeves as cop Jack Traven and Sandra Bullock in her breakout role as Annie. The two worked incredibly well together, and it would have been great to see them reprise their roles for a sequel. But since Reeves decided not to return, Speed 2 was almost left for dead in the water. But the powers that be decided that the sequel would instead follow Bullock's character Annie, who had a new cop boyfriend played by Jason Patric. Things go extremely wrong while on a cruise, and we find out that this time around the bad guy is a computer hacker played by Willem Dafoe. Sadly, neither Bullock's return nor Dafoe's appearance were enough to keep this movie afloat, and it earned a disappointing $48 million at the box office. We're yet to see or hear of a Speed 3, unless of course you count the Milk Float episode of Father Ted, which went by that title.
2,
Superman 4: The Quest for Peace. Some people would have probably put Batman and Robin in the place of Superman 4 on their own list, but The Quest for Peace is an incredibly cheap-looking movie, whereas at least Batman and Robin look like the millions of dollars it cost to make. The special effects and production values throughout Superman 4 are incredibly poor, no doubt due to much of the budget being spent on rehiring Christopher Reeve and Gene Hackman. But that wasn't all that made Superman 4 such a poor outing. Nuclear Man was brought in as the main villain, a man who uses nuclear power to live and is basically the antithesis of Superman. Action scenes, which are supposed to be the highlight of any action movie, were laughable, which is never good in an action-oriented film, especially when you technically have 2 Supermen battling it out. It seems that the Christopher Reeve era of Superman died with this movie, which isn't such a bad thing. I mean, imagine what Superman 5 would have looked like. In 2006, a failed attempt to reboot the series came in the form of Superman Returns, but it was 2013's Man of Steel that finally got Superman flying around Metropolis successfully once again. Before we get to the number one pick on our list, here are a couple of honorable mentions. Junior. Though 1994's Junior wasn't technically a sequel per se, it was a clear nod to the movie Twins, which also starred Arnold Schwarzenegger and Danny DeVito. Although there is currently word of a Twins sequel in the works, aptly named Triplets, that will star both Schwarzenegger and DeVito again, along with Eddie Murphy, no dates or plans have been set for this one yet. XXX State of the Union. Ice Cube and Lee Tamahori were hired to star and direct, respectively, in State of the Union, which was released back in 2005. It completely bombed at the box office, most likely due to its overload of CGI effects and over-the-top action, which ruined the whole point of the first film, which was to integrate extreme sports into an action movie. A third XXX movie has already been in and out of theaters, but it only got made due to the return of Vin Diesel. Otherwise, we feel this franchise would have been never seen from again. Beverly Hills Cop 3. Oof, this is a sequel to a sequel that should have probably never ever been made. But after the second film became a massive blockbuster success, it was only a matter of time before a third one arrived. Unfortunately, it seemed rather flat and uninspired, and Eddie Murphy seemed like he was sleepwalking through it. It was even rumored that Murphy felt quite depressed during filming. A fourth movie has been in development hell for years, and the proposed TV series never took off, making the revival of this franchise about as unlikely as a banana in the tailpipe.
1,
Okay, without further ado, here's our number one pick for movie sequels that killed their franchise. Blair Witch 2: Book of Shadows. We'll be honest, we had completely forgotten that Blair Witch 2 even existed, but it's no surprise that there would be a sequel to the Blair Witch Project, which is one of the most profitable movies of all time, earning over $248 million worldwide. And since it only cost around $60,000 to make, that's an incredible earning. Like most horrors and movies in general, they planned on turning this into a yearly event, but the plans hit a bit of a snag with the release of Blair Witch 2: Book of Shadows. The main thing here is that there was actually no Book of Shadows even in the film, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. Throughout Blair Witch 2, you can see the signs of an intelligent film, but those are quickly buried by the test of the audience's patience, and a twist ending that adds no drama and frankly doesn't make sense. We can't blame the studio for wanting to cash in on such a successful movie. I mean, just look at the abundance of Saw and Paranormal Activity sequels, but since they diverted from the found footage style of the original and re-edited a lot of the film, the final product ultimately displeased a lot of people. Are you a fan of any of these films? Or maybe you're still waiting on a sequel to some other movie that may never come? Let us know in the comments below, and thanks for watching.
Don't forget to like us and subscribe for more Elite Facts.